You had mixed feelings about confronting Cheryl Hines on the carpet?
I just, I know how much crap she's taken. I always have a problem when people want to make fun of stuff that's really personal. I just feel like that's crossing a line to me.
Well, yeah, you keep it to the horrible things that they're doing for their jobs, I guess.
That's your opinion. I don't know what you're talking about, Matt. I did have mixed feelings about the joke. In my mind, the joke was as much about her being ostracized, whether fairly or unfairly, than anything personal about her.
What was the joke you had prepped for her?
Well, I just had heard somebody interviewing her and said, "What makes this night so special?" So I used the same premise, and then I said, "What makes this night so special? This is the only celebrity party you'll ever be invited to again?"
Hello and welcome to Obsessed the Podcast. I'm Matt Wilstein from The Daily Beast, and today on the show, I am joined by a comedy legend who spent decades writing for Saturday Night Live and creating the TV Funhouse animated shorts. He is best known for his lifelong role as the voice and hand behind Triumph the Insult Comic Dog. And you can currently hear him on his new podcast, Humor Me with Robert Smigel and Friends. Robert Smigel, welcome to Obsessed the Podcast.
It's nice to be on Obsessed the Podcast. Thank you for that introduction. That would make me 28 years old, having it Triumph as a lifelong role.
Yeah, you're not done yet. It could still be.
Since I was a baby.
Oh, since you're a baby, I see what you mean. I thought you meant that you're not going to be doing it for the rest of your life, which I think you probably are.
Oh, yeah, I have bills to pay. And yeah, no, I think you meant the role of a lifetime.
The role of a lifetime. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. I think it is the role of a lifetime.
What every actor dreams of playing.
Well, Robert, as always, there's so much that I want to talk to you about. I want to get to your podcast, but I do think we should start with your experience pretty recently at the White House Correspondents Dinner, which you were attending on behalf of The Daily Show as Triumph, and you were there when everything went down. So, what happened? Where were you when this attack happened?
We were wrapping up, and I was actually recording a few lines that I've stumbled. Sometimes if I stumble, I'll re-record a line and just to make sure the audio's good. And that's what we were doing. And the camera was actually rolling. And well, I don't think it was on me, but we heard the gunshots. And at the first two, I thought maybe just some loud accident upstairs or downstairs. And then there were numerous more, and then we knew something was up, and suddenly a flood of people ran into this room. We were at the red carpet still.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this, but the writer on the show, on this segment with me was Matt O'Brien, an old friend of mine from Conan days. And he says that we were only about 50 feet away and on the same floor as the incident. I had entered from a different way, so I still haven't totally put together where we were. But yeah, people were running out from that section where we heard the gunfire toward the exit, and I figured that I'd better do the same. So I did.
So I will say that I'm glad that you were able to be there and do comedy at this event anyway, because it was especially necessary in lieu of an actual comedian host, which the show the Correspondents Dinner has given up on. So I'm glad we had somebody roasting there.
Yeah, it turned out to be kind of a de facto, Seth Meyers or Michelle Wolf.
Yeah. You got to really confront a lot of these MAGA people to their faces on the red carpet.
I can't believe it. Honestly, I feel like we had no expectation of having that much access to that many people. I mean, first of all, I didn't know that practically the entire chain of command was going to be at this thing. And maybe it shouldn't have. But yeah. But and they were all coming over to the red carpet. I was kind of half surprised and half not that everybody who wanted to speak to me was conservative, but the actual serious journalists, Wolf Blitzer, and these are people I've spoken to before, you
Yeah.
know, or at least I've come close to with some of them, like Wolf Blitzer and Caitlin Collins, and
Mhm.
I mean the guy from Brian Stetler,
Yeah,
the
Brian
reliable
Stelter.
sources guy. He wouldn't talk to me. And I'm like, Jesus, like, what are these people afraid of? You know, and they knew I was with the Daily Show, for God's sake.
Yeah. But meanwhile, you're getting the, Homeland Security Secretary and,
Well, I don't think he had any idea what the hell he was talking to. But, certainly Dana White is a big fan of Triumph, it turns out. And a lot of these people, that's a testament to how old I am, Matt. That these people running the country grew up watching Conan, some of them,
yeah, that's funny, yeah.
So, I mean, Marco Rubio,
Yeah, he seemed to be having a blast with you.
which I respect. I mean, why take this seriously? You can only look bad avoiding the puppet or just, looking afraid of the puppet.
Yeah. I will say one person who did not seem thrilled about the situation was Cheryl Hines.
Yeah, well, I had mixed feelings about that, interaction.
Yeah. Had you met her? Because you were on Curb and
I've
everything.
met
Yeah.
Cheryl Hines before, not I've never had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with her because, when I was on Curb, it was the New York, season
Oh, right, yeah.
where I got to play the mechanic who
Who
ran a
sounded,
softball team.
conspicuously like Triumph, if I recall.
Well, I remember auditioning for that part, and, they told me the guy's name was Yari, and I auditioned with an Israeli accent, and then Jeff Garlin calls me later in the day and says, "Larry loved you, but he said, just do Triumph. Just do Triumph." And I was like, "Whatever." That's still my favorite moment in show business, I think.
Yeah. But you had mixed feelings about confronting Cheryl Hines on the carpet?
I just, I know how much crap she's taken, and
Mhm.
I don't know her personally, and I don't know what's going on in her head. I mean, I always have a problem when people wanna make fun of stuff that's really personal. Like, I didn't wanna do jokes about Caroline Levitt's husband being old. I
Mhm.
just feel like that's crossing a line to me.
Well, yeah, you keep it to the horrible things that they're doing for their jobs, I guess.
That's your opinion. I don't know what you're talking about, Matt. But, but that's kind of, just a personal choice, and in her case, like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, she sold her soul," and I don't know her well enough. I don't know, may if she's in love, it's complicated. If you fall in love with someone and their political views are different, and so I have very mixed feelings about the whole thing, but I don't wanna offer, like, a pronouncement of who's right and who's wrong, but on the surface, to me, it seems odd that you would just write off a person because of their political views, somebody that you know really well. But I don't want to pass judgment on, the people who have done that because I don't know them well enough and I don't know their relationship to Cheryl. But I did have mixed feelings about the joke. In my mind, the joke was as much about her being ostracized, whether fairly or
Mm.
unfairly,
Yeah.
than anything personal about her.
What was the joke you had prepped for her, just for anyone who missed it?
I think it was, well, I just had heard someone from Fox or somebody interviewing her and said, "What makes this night so special, Cheryl?" So I used the same premise, and then I said, "What makes this it's so special? Um, is it the fact that this is the only celebrity party you'll ever be invited to again?" Something like that.
Yeah, she did not smile.
And in my mind, I was like, it's subjective, like, because a lot of people are like, "Fuck celebrity parties," you know? Um, so I didn't think it was that bad when I said it, but clearly, uh, she wasn't thrilled with it. And, you know, people at the show liked it and didn't feel like it was
Yeah, hit too close to home, I guess.
I mean, I'm sure she's dealt with a lot since then.
Yeah.
And,
I guess you did not get too close to Trump or Melania. I don't think they were on
No,
the.
they were not. They did not walk the red carpet.
Did you have stuff prepared in case you did?
No, I had no expectation. I had no expectation that those 2 would be on the red carpet, and honestly, I had very little. Fortunately, we had prepped some jokes for Pete Hegseth, and I had no expectation that Marco Rubio was gonna be there.
Yeah. So you have to be on the fly.
Well, we had talked about a joke about Polymarket that we might have done with Hegseth. So I just asked, Rubio was the perfect person to ask the same question.
Well, maybe Rubio could play along with you a little bit. I don't think that Trump or Melania would have done so, and I think we got another insight into how much they hate comedy with the reaction to Jimmy Kimmel, who of course made jokes about them before the dinner.
Everything's a distraction now, you know? I mean, the more like it's almost like they're trying to make comedy a wedge issue, like
Mhm.
transgender, bathrooms or the way Karl Rove used gay marriage 20 years ago. Like, let's just get people angry about something else so that they don't pay attention to what's really going on,
Yeah.
you
What
know?
I don't get is, do they not realize how much it makes them look like snowflakes and people who can't handle.
It doesn't seem to, bother their supporters. That's the thing, you know? Yes, it makes them look like snowflakes, but deep down, I don't think people are voting because of, "Oh, Trump's a snowflake for complaining about Jimmy Kimmel." Now, if Jimmy Kimmel had gotten taken off the air, I think it would have lit a fire under some people to realize, like, "Okay, now we're really cutting into free speech," but,
Mhm.
it's very frustrating. It feels like, um, a lot of this stuff is just, um, it's just fodder to keep you looking this way while everything's happening over there.
Yeah. Yeah. You've been such a big part of the late night TV world for so long. We're talking during Stephen Colbert's final run of shows at CBS. Is it true that you're responsible for his career?
That's, a bit of hyperbolic, description, I would say, but I did have a big role in starting his career. I mean, he's the first person to say it, you know? He said it many times, and he asked me to introduce him at the Writers Guild Awards when he won an award this year. Um, and, I if it's true, then as I said at that night, that would probably be my biggest contribution to comedy.
What was that first thing that you put him in, or that you how did you first connect with him?
So uh, I was a co-producer at SNL for a few years. I'd been there for like 5 years, 6 years, and that's what happens. Some writers get promoted, and I was so every summer for like 2 or 3 summers in a row, I would go with Lorne Michaels and a few other people to scout talent in Chicago. And on in this particular year, we were going to Second City, and we'd heard all about this amazing, funny guy named Steve Carell. And we show up there. It's a Saturday night, and Steve's not on the show. Steve got apparently he got a commercial that he had to take because,
And that was more important than the showcase for Lorne.
oh, everyone was jealous of Steve. "You got a Brown's chicken ad? Oh my God." Second City, it pays okay, but, you know, these guys they're young. They're all young. They're all struggling. So he had to take it. And naturally, Lorne Michaels isn't gonna come back tomorrow. He's got his schedule. He's a busy guy. So we got the understudy.
Really?
And, on this particular night, the standout in the improv set was the understudy because suddenly he came to life. Whatever sketches he was working on were, you could really feel his personality in them. And everything that's special about Steven, his wordplay, his deadpan, his intelligence, suddenly brilliantly on display. And so at the end of the night, everybody was like being polled, who was your favorite? Blah, blah. And I was like, the understudy. The understudy was amazing. And, he never got an audition that year, but
Yeah, what happened? Lorne didn't listen to you.
no, that's okay. Uh, you know, uh, I think I connected with him almost as much as with his writing and his mind as
Mhm.
he wasn't like a showy performer at all. So, and also Lorne is also considering a lot of other things when he watches auditions like this, because he's also thinking about what the holes are in the current cast, you know? And maybe he sees this guy and he's like, "Yeah, we still have Phil Hartman. We don't need a kind of intelligent authority figure kind of guy right now." So there's a lot that can go into his
Yeah.
process.
Does make me wonder if Steve Carell had been there that night, if he would have.
I think Steve Carell would have been on SNL.
Wow.
Steve Carell was the easiest hire I think I ever made. He was like the next year, I think Chris Farley was in the cast, and there was no doubt that Lorne was gonna hire Chris Farley because he was a complete, uh, you know, ball of fire and a complete original in his own way. And in my opinion, Steve Carell had the same kind of brilliant, uh, you know, he had the same unique quality in his own way, um, that you really hadn't seen. And that's not to take anything away from Steven, because I think Steven would have been a great SNL performer too. But his talents were just not as conspicuous when you watch it.
Mm.
He's more of a deadpan guy.
Yeah.
Steve Carell was, like I said, the easiest hire we had at the Dana Carvey show. He came in, uh, did an in-person audition, and we just knew that this guy was special and that he would be a great cast member. And, we had to go through a formal process where he auditioned again on stage for the ABC executives, but we had no doubt in our heads. That was a slam dunk, Steve Carell.
And that's what you hired Colbert for as well, for Dana Carvey?
Well, yeah, well, Colbert, yes. So 3 years later, Colbert still hadn't gotten a lot of work. I think he might have gotten to do a show on Comedy Central called Exit 57 with Amy Sedaris and Paul Dinello. I at some point, he got to do this show on Comedy Central, but it didn't last particularly long. And I had him meet Conan because a year or 2 later, I got to be the first head writer, producer of Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and that was really my dream job, and we were looking at anybody. I had met Andy Richter a year before. I fixed Conan up with him. Those 2 hit it off beautifully. Well, then Conan and I went to Chicago, and I wanted him to meet Colbert, but he wasn't able to see him perform, so we just met him at a loud bar, and everybody was nervous, and nothing came of it. But
Hmm.
I remembered Colbert again when the Dana Carvey show happened, and oddly enough, he didn't send in an audition tape like most people would send in, where they show you different characters and stuff. He just held up his baby and made a plea, a desperate plea to hire him, and he was in tears, and it was funny, and Carvey and I liked it, but Dana was like, "I'm not exactly sure this shows, I mean, it's a funny tape, but I don't really know,
Yeah.
well, this isn't demonstrating whether he could be a sketch performer." And I
Yeah.
said, "Let's just fly him in. Let's just fly
Yeah.
him in."
Trust me.
Yeah, at least enough to fly him in. And then he gave a very funny audition,
Yeah.
and and we were delighted to have him, and he and Steve Carell were both outstanding on the Dana Carvey show.
Yeah. And that show went on to be the most successful sketch show of all time. So there you go.
Yeah, the rest is history, and, you know, I'm a billionaire, and I just do Triumph for fun, not money.
People probably may or may not know that Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell did end up on Saturday Night Live in one way, which is through
Correct.
you as well. Can you explain what that was?
Well, the first thing Stephen Colbert flew from the airport to a recording studio, at Sony Recording Studios on West 54th Street, and, I was like, "Hey, so glad you're here. Here's the part." Because I had already written, Ambiguously Gay Duo was a cartoon that I thought of not for Saturday Night Live, but when I was at the Dana Carvey show.
And you got great performances out of Colbert and Carell.
Colbert and Carell were amazing, and, I was the bad guy, big head, and I enjoyed doing that, and then the show got canceled, and I thought, "Well, what did I enjoy the most?" And I think it was that cartoon, and then over the summer, I just daydreamed Fun with Real Audio, and, what if Michael Jackson was like Yogi Bear and he can't resist underage boys?
Set up this whole other career for you at SNL.
I called Lorne Michaels at the end of the summer and I said, I thought of a way I could come back to the show. And he's like, "Let's do it." It is the easiest pitch I've ever had in my career. And that was 12 years after that.
Do you feel like your relationship with Lorne was really different when you came back versus when you were there before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's a complicated thing to work for anybody. And I discovered that at the Dana Carvey show
Mhm.
because I had people that, we had a really good relationship. But once I became the boss and the decider,
Yeah, it's
it
tough.
gets stressful. And as a matter of fact, about 4 weeks into that show, because there were people that were down and out that Dana and I had hired, and now I'm getting suddenly, like, 4 or 5 weeks later, I'm getting side eye from some of them because they don't like the choices we're making,
Right.
and I literally called Lorne Michaels and said to him, "I get it now, and I'm sorry."
Wow.
I had to do it. I had to express that to him, and he just laughed. 'Cause he got it, obviously, what I was going for, but then yes, a couple of years later, I went back, and no one's ever given me as much creative freedom. I mean, Lorne Michaels gave the writers an insane amount of creative freedom at SNL compared to anybody who'd ever used writers on television before, but what the end result was ultimately the writers feeling too empowered, and it's just natural. Anybody who's creative, certainly most of us, have some sort of creative ego that deep down believes in ourselves, but is also incredibly frail and able to, go from 100 to 0 if we have a failure. But if we have a little ounce of success, it can go right back up.
Mhm.
And that's when it gets really funny. And people who were just desperate to be hired 6 months ago are like, why the fuck is there another Pat scene in the show? When Chris Farley hit that threshold, that was, like, very weird and satisfying at the same time because I was like, "Man, if Chris Farley's capable of getting there, then, it's just the way this show is built." And at the Dana Carvey show, we tried to be much more, um, you know, I didn't we weren't aloof. Lorne would keep a distance between himself and a lot of people, especially newcomers, and, um, and that was by design, I'm sure, but it was never something that I was capable of doing, but still, people would manage to get frustrated, and that's when I called Lorne and said, "I'm sorry," and yes, when I came back to SNL, that's the most creative freedom I've ever had in my career, and it was a joy. He just basically the first year, I would run cartoons by him, and then by the second year, he literally said to me, "I like to be surprised on Saturday." which was just the nicest thing anybody could have ever said, and, it meant
did that ever go wrong? Did he ever get a bad surprise?
sometimes, very rarely, but a couple of sketches got cut, and, it is what it is. I mean, I had a very high percentage of success there. Fortunately, I because I became my own Lorne. I knew that my sketch was, odds are it's gonna be on the air, so I was my worst critic. You know, I didn't rely on anybody else to put it down, and sometimes between dress and air, I would make changes that Lauren didn't ask for. I would say, "Oh, I don't think that worked," and I would just take it out myself, um, because I felt a huge responsibility to Lauren and to the show to have been given that position and opportunity, so, but it was an amazing opportunity. I just never left. I mean, my wife was like, "Don't you think you wanna go on and do other things?" And I'm like, "I have the best gig, and I get to do this, and I get to show up at Conan and do, Arnold Schwarzenegger's mouth and Triumph, and they're paying me well at both shows." And I never really I couldn't let go. And then they let go of me ultimately. I mean, it had been 12 years.
Was it just time, do you think, or was there something that
No, it was
precipitated it?
budget. It was budget. It was, the year before they had gotten rid of, like, really good people like Rachel Dratch and Horatio and Chris
Mhm.
Parnell and somebody else, and it was entirely because network television was starting to dwindle in terms of ratings. It was universal. It wasn't just Saturday Night Live. I mean, that was actually a brilliant creative I think maybe the best cast in the history of the show was the mid-2000s with Sandberg and Kristen and Forte and Armisen and Bill Hader and Maya Rudolph. It's just Amy Poehler. It's, like, mind-boggling, and I think, it's proven out because they've all gone on to have amazing careers. But the ratings were dwindling at the same time, and so they were putting pressure on Lorne to cut things. And when Lorne was kind enough to call me to tell me that he couldn't keep me on anymore, he said they'd wanted to get rid of the cartoons like a year earlier, and he fought for them, and I believe him. Um, so, so that happened, and at the same time, Conan got The Tonight Show and moved to Los Angeles. So I didn't have, that safety net anymore, and that's when I basically shifted into movies.
So, this new podcast has a very specific premise, so I wanted you to explain. So you're kind of helping people punch up their lives is how I'm imagining it.
Yeah, punch up, if somebody has a speech they have to make or a presentation at work, or they wanna write a letter to somebody, any number of issues that have come up that we never even envisioned, because we have a website where people can leave messages and ask for things, ask for help for things. And it was entirely my wife's idea. I've been
Mhm.
striking out right and left trying to do Triumph vehicles, game shows with Triumph, a TV Funhouse revival, and some sitcom ideas. But my wife came through with this one, and I was just very excited for her because she's always been really funny, but she does real things. She works for Next for Autism and not only fundraises, but selects, goes around the country and looks at grant applications, programs, and tries to determine which ones have the most potential and, really important stuff. And she's a mother of 3. And, so she's like my drive-by writer. Like, she's always been too busy to really write, but I would, like, tell her a cartoon idea, and sometimes she would be like, "Yeah," and then to just have David Brenner, he falls through the trap door, and this time Tom Snyder's already got his finger on the button, and, like, it would be that's totally out of context, but she would give me ideas that would end up being, like, the funniest joke in my cartoon.
Mhm.
So, it really makes me happy that, um, she has the opportunity to be, a creator of something, and I'm trying not to blow it for her, trying to
Yeah.
do a good job
Well,
being the
I
host.
know you've booked some really good guests. I think
Yeah,
you have David Letterman coming on. That's a
I
big
could
deal.
not believe it. So Steve O'Donnell, so believe it or not, we got one call from a guy from Turkey, from Istanbul, who happens to be a big comedy fan, and he leaves a message saying, "I wanna write a fan letter to the writer Steve O'Donnell, um, and I wanna impress him and make him feel like, I'm somebody that is worthy of talking to him and blah, blah, blah." And I immediately thought, well, okay, who wouldn't it be great to bring in people who are experts at Steve O'Donnell's likes and dislikes? And, wouldn't it be the first person I thought of was Downey because Jim Downey, who, was, the head writer at Letterman for before Steve O'Donnell took over. And then I thought, "What is there any way Letterman would" I gotta ask. I gotta ask. I don't have a real I mean, I've met David Letterman numerous times, and he's always been incredibly kind, but I don't have a real relationship with him, so I asked through his, representative and pitched the whole idea, and he really took to the idea. He liked the idea of the show, and so we agreed to it. I mean, none of us could believe it, and I didn't believe it until he walked in that it would really happen, but he did. He hung out for, like, 2 hours, and we had a great time. It's one of my favorite episodes, and, he was even gracious enough to call me a few days later and thank me and for the good for the laughs and the good time, so, you know, my wife's done a lot for me, and that's over the years, and that's just one more feather in her cap. Even if the show doesn't work, I got to hang out with Dave for I mean, he's literally, like, Letterman, Steve Martin, Andy Kaufman. That was, like, my holy trinity growing up, in, like, the '70s and early '80s. So, it just meant everything to me just to hang out with him and to make him laugh a few times.
So before we go, I do have a
Yeah.
series of quick, sort of more speed round questions that I wanted to ask you. I don't know how speedy you'll
Mm.
be, but that's okay. Um, is there a surprising thing that people recognize you from, want to talk to you about when they come up to you? Because obviously, they may not know that you're Triumph, but what do people come up to you and want to talk about?
Uh, very few people come up to me, and the ones that do are usually, like, people who wanna get into comedy, like, they're
Oh, okay, they're looking
type
for
of
a
people
job.
who will, like yeah, well, or they just want advice on how to start or whatever. Recently, I actually did an autograph show because that's how much money I need, everybody. Um, and, what was the weirdest thing someone recognized me from? A couple of people called out my appearance in the movie Chuck and Larry. I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry. You know, Sandler movies, surprisingly, like, it's funny because I all my hard work is my own stuff, and then I'll show up at a Sandler movie for, like, a day and
Hmm.
do, the guy who gets thrown through the glass door in Happy Gilmore, and, uh, and then people will talk about that.
And you're like, but wait, I do all this other stuff. Yeah.
Well,
You,
whatever. No, there are people who know me from Triumph for sure, but they're usually, like, students of comedy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you have popped up in many Adam Sandler movies, and I know he's been a collaborator of yours. Do you have a story that encapsulates your relationship with him and what it's like to be his friend?
Oh, man. I mean, he's just one of the people I instantly connected with at SNL. I always say there's 3 that I connected with the most. I mean, Odenkirk I knew beforehand, so he doesn't count, but, Dana Carvey, he and I connected in terms of our love for kind of the musicality of impersonating people, and turning impressions into kind of, abstract, takes, we both sort of did really silly Lorne Michaels impressions that have had their own, I do Lorne in the Lorne movie. Did you know that?
I haven't seen the Lorne movie yet, but I wanna see
The
it.
Lorne movie, the director, Morgan Neville, asked me to do TV Funhouse cartoons in the
Okay.
Lorne movie. He had certain narrative sections that were about Lorne, and he was like, "How can I dramatize these? I don't wanna do reenactments," so he called me up and asked me to make cartoons of Lorne.
So you play Lorne in the Lorne movie, that's pretty
I
cool.
play Lorne, and yes, I'm credited as the voice of Lorne. And I was like, "Is Lorne gonna be okay with this?" And he said, "Lorne's, wants me to do whatever I want." And, so I took a chance there because I
Yeah.
really, like
Did you hear from him after?
I went to the premiere,
Yeah.
and Lorne was very happy with the mo it's a really good movie, it's really
Yeah.
well done. It's not as, it's not like a hagiography kind of thing, like um, a lot of SNL movies sort of, you know, they go overboard on, like, SNL, it's the Coca-Cola of comedy, it's and they over dramatize things like Tuesday night in the writer's room and all that. And this guy had a very light, whimsical touch to the whole movie. He didn't take
Mhm.
any of it seriously. Lawrence says some beautiful things at different points in the movie, but they speak for themselves. There's nothing is manipulative in terms of the movie making, and that's what's so brilliant about it. But yeah, I was nervous. I was like, "Am I really?" Because I had done this once before to Lorne. On the 25th anniversary of SNL, I did a cartoon. He asked me to do a cartoon, and I made it about Lorne. The 25th anniversary, and he's, like, hawking cheesy products like Conehead suppositories uh, and then he kinda had to go along with it because 'cause I'd made it. But at the end of that one, I think he was also happy. But this movie, uh he was very happy, and I think it makes him look cool. I mean, it's kind of emblematic, in a way that Lorne would be cool with his own, you know, biographical movie, documentary contains someone, imitating him. I mean, that's just
Yeah, it's
really
kinda perfect.
cool. Yeah, but it's cool because it makes he's always been that way, like, he has these books that Tom Shales and Jim Miller write
Mhm.
about SNL, these oral histories, and he doesn't censor them at all. People are saying terrible things about Lorne. I mean, my stuff is just playful, but it's still, you know, gently poking the bear. But I think he understands that it just makes him look better in a way that he's, the freedom he allows for creative people to do and say what they want.
Yeah. That was a long tangent. We were talking about the 3 people you connected with at SNL.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Adam Sandler.
Yeah,
Wow. Sorry for the tangent.
that's okay.
The next person was Conan because Conan and I connected in a totally different way, like, sort of the way we kind of can reduce people to cartoons,
Mhm.
this sort of weird detached quality we both had looking at the world and our cartoon influence. Then the last person and they all came at different times during my SNL's tenure, and then Adam came in 1990, and he was like the first person that I really felt a kinship to personally that, I mean, we were both Jewish kids who were raised by parents who treated us like gods and were just really warm families, but crazy families at the same time. And like, a lot of writers didn't have that. They didn't have that. They didn't grow up with that level of warmth and um, community the same way. And so there was something about that we just connected on a personal level. And Adam has this amazing gift that he can combine absurdity with real, grounded observation about people, like, in a way that's incredibly sophisticated and in a way that very few people at SNL have ever been able to do. And so he opened up, a side of me that I hadn't really, uh, made much of an effort to express at SNL. And and then that carried through to movies. Even though, movie like You Don't Mess with the Zohan is probably as cartoony a movie as Adam's ever made. But then I made The Week Of with him, which was not a big success, but I had a great time making it, and it was everything that I'm talking about. It was about this Jewish family, and they have a daughter, and she marries, this, rich black surgeon's son, and, and that's probably the most grounded project I've ever made, and, I really loved making it and was I wish it had done better because I would love to make more
Yeah, well,
projects like
it's I think he's kinda leaning into that side too with a lot of the stuff that he's doing with his daughters, and, I mean, these
Yeah.
Netflix movies, yeah, are much more, sort of sweet than I think what he was known for as a younger man, which is not shouldn't be surprising, but
Yeah, I mean, he's playing, a dad a lot more nowadays. But I have a couple silly ideas that I would love him to do that, would be age appropriate, and I hope he goes for them at some point. We've talked about
yeah.
them, and,
Any you wanna mention here so that we can just kinda, like, manifest it into the
I'm sure he wouldn't want me to give away a premise, before it's time.
something to look forward to. Um, Looking back, is there something that you said no to at the time that you now wish you could go back and say yes to?
Uh, I probably should have done the Pamela Anderson roast.
Oh, as Triumph?
Yeah, it would have been good for Triumph's career. There was a lot going on at the time. I was very busy. I had was coming off, like, the Eminem stuff, and, um, I it was a weird time. I did, like, the Michael Jackson trial with Triumph, in and they wanted me to do something with Eminem in, at that movie awards, and I was like, "Enough with Eminem." It was so weird. Like,
Yeah,
I should have been the little cockroach, like, clinging to Eminem, like, and trying to
yeah.
squeeze every drop out of that.
His people were trying to get you to do more?
Yeah, well, he made a video called "Ass Like That," and I agreed to do that, and then I'm hearing, now he wants you to be at the MTV Movie Awards, and he wants to do "Ass Like That," and he wants you to be a part of it with Triumph, and I was getting very like, "Okay, but what's the idea?" And then they kinda blindsided me and made a fake Triumph puppet,
Oh,
um, and Eminem did it to Lindsay Lohan.
you stealing your bit.
Yeah, well, he's, stealing it and mocking it and paying tribute. I mean, I didn't feel like, "Oh, everybody's gonna think that." I mean, it was more that they never called back, and then they just did that. That kind of irritated me, and then the same producers called a month later and like, "We're doing roasts now, and Pam Anderson," and I was like, "Fuck this, I'm not gonna no."
You didn't know how big the roasts were gonna get.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I gotta say, and I've done some roasts and had success. I did a James Carville roast at the Kennedy Center once, and I did a Rob Reiner roast, uh, that was very funny, but it's really not what I enjoy doing as Triumph. I like going out there, talking to people right up to their face, and I also like being a reporter. I really enjoy that because rather than just saying, "If you were any fatter, blah, 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 would, yeah, whatever," I like doing jokes that are in the form of questions a lot of times because I love how the passive aggressive aspect of Triumph when he's taking on this important role of being a reporter and asking questions that are incredibly insulting. Like when in theory, that was a funny thing to ask. Is it because, you're not going to be invited to any other, you know, that kind of, the, I'm not defending anything but the format of that question at this moment.
Yeah. Well, and, like, usually when you do it, you get a laugh from the person you're doing it to. They can take the
Oh,
joke.
that's always fun. Like, the most famous thing I ever asked somebody was, the guy dressed as a, um, Star Wars,
Stormtrooper?
stormtrooper, my god, and, he's like, this is to help me breathe, and which button do you press, uh, to call your parents to pick you up, you know? I That's the quote I get
Yeah,
constantly.
that's a great one.
But what's so
Yeah,
funny about it is that it's in the form of a question. It's not like, "You're a loser," It's just it's so cutting,
the context
but
is everything.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I really enjoy, those
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
jokes.
The flip side of my question, is there anything that you said yes to at the time that you now wish you could go back and say no to?
I got a lot of money to do the Jack and Triumph show on Adult Swim, and it was a dream job for me because, I love the idea of doing Triumph in a contained environment, but I don't think an Adult Swim, they really got it, and they offered me the most money, but in retrospect, uh, any other network I would have been on, it would have been the craziest show by far, but on Adult Swim, their audience was much younger, and they saw a sitcom with what they perceived as a laugh track. We had a live audience.
Mhm.
They were like, "Why is Triumph doing something so corny?"
Yeah,
You know, "This is
they
so
didn't get the
corny."
format.
They didn't understand or care that we were commenting on that we were the whole joke to me was putting Triumph in an innocent context and having him do crazy things, and I think it could have worked on on a network, not maybe a network, but even Comedy Central or TBS, and the thing is, other networks wanted it, but they weren't offering as much money, they weren't offering as big a guarantee, and I just went for the security, and, um, and it was the wrong decision.
Yeah, and now I'm not even sure Adult Swim exists anymore.
Well, nothing exists anymore on broadcast television, but we if I would have been happy with doing 5 seasons. This is like 2015.
Yeah,
I would have
yeah.
been or 2014. So I would have been more than happy to do 5 seasons anywhere and then have broadcast television implode.
They say, you should never meet your heroes, so I'm curious if you have a story that either proves that saying right or wrong.
I mean, yeah, like I said, my heroes when I met Steve Martin, he couldn't have been more exciting to he was everything I wanted because I'm really not the kind of person who's always on. Like,
Mhm.
I'm more so now than I was when I was 26 when I met Steve Martin. But, I wrote this, sketch for him called, Holiday Wish, that, they run it every Christmas or whatever,
That's
and
one
it
of my
was
all-time favorites.
oh, well, thank you.
I still quote that.
That's a good one. Yeah, Odenkirk helped me a little bit with that, but, he wasn't even at the show yet. But, um but I got to meet him after pretty much after writing it. I was, like, too scared to approach him until this was, like, Thursday,
Mhm.
So I wrote it, and it got through, and Lorne laughed really hard, which made me so happy because this is, like, my 2nd year. And then he comes up to me, and he's just very serious about talking it down, and he came up with a better ending, this line about they should die like pigs in hell, that was his. And, but he didn't approach it. He wasn't, like, trying to impress me with quick wit or anything. He just came at me, like, completely secure in his brilliance and just wanting to talk it out and being very he said, "It's very rare that I get anything that's written for me that's, ready to go like that." I mean,
Mm, that must have felt good.
it was amazing. It was the combination of him being so gracious and so real at the same time, despite his incredible, silliness and inherent silliness and genius that, was just like a dream come true meeting him.
That's incredible. Yeah, that was definitely a formative piece of comedy for me, I think, seeing that and feeling like I got the joke, because I was pretty young when that happened, I think, but, that was a big one for me.
That's cool.
Um, yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Humor Me with Robert Smigel and Friends is available on the iHeartRadio app and everywhere you get podcasts, with new episodes airing weekly on Fridays. Robert Smigel, thank you for being here on Obsessed the Podcast.
Of course, Matt.
All right. Thank you again to Robert Smigel for that incredible conversation. There were definitely a lot of tangents, but I hope that you enjoyed them as much as I did. I always love talking to Robert. He has had such an incredible career and shared so much with us today. So I really do appreciate that. If you're enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to us on YouTube at the Obsessed channel. Leave a comment on this video to let us know what you think of the show, who you want to see as a guest, just any feedback you might have. We really appreciate it. You can also follow us wherever you get your podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a rating and review there as well. Thank you to our producer, Rachel Passer, and we'll be back with an all-new episode of Obsessed the Podcast very soon.